Hi everyone, this is Matt. Welcome back to my channel. So, today I want to talk to you about my PhD, whether it was worth doing it, was it enough for my future, and essentially, should you do a PhD, should you not do a PhD? And I finished my PhD over 5 years ago, and I checked some statistics about salaries for PhD graduates versus people with undergrad or masters. And essentially, if you graduate from a PhD, then you will make about 25% extra as compared to people with bachelors. So it's definitely a good return on investment compared to bachelors. But then when you compare salaries of PhD graduates to graduates with master's degrees, PhDs only earn 2-3% extra on top. So financially, you probably shouldn't be doing PhD because it's not gonna really earn you more money. And also at the same time, when you're doing your PhD, if you're lucky, you'll be paid something, but it'll be bare minimum. And most of the people don't earn anyway, or and even worse, they have to pay for their PhDs. So financially, as compared to your peers who, go straight away into industry, get jobs in the real world, let's call it, um, then yeah, definitely financially you are set back during this time, and then later it doesn't really get much better than it gets for your colleagues with masters. So maybe this is not the way. And what about prestige? Because I remember when I was doing my PhD, it felt nice, to be a PhD student, to be able to say it to people, and then later, even um, straight after my PhD, introducing myself, telling them that, oh, I've just finished the PhD, whatever. But now it's been 5 years. I basically don't use the title on a day-to-day basis. I very rarely use it. Um, it doesn't really change anything for me. However, definitely having the title opened the doors for me to become a medical writer. Don't get me wrong, I could still become a medical writer without a PhD, but it was definitely easier to break into medical writing, into regulatory medical writing with a PhD. So I think this is my, lesson for myself and for anyone who wants to do a PhD is that you probably really need to have a plan for what you want to do after your PhD because you really want to make sure that your PhD is going to be worthwhile in the long run, that it's actually going to help you with something in the future. So, for example, if you know that your PhD will help you with getting this dream job, then that's awesome. That's really useful. But the question then is PhD enough to get this dream job? So, if you wanted to stay in academia, then yeah, you definitely need a PhD, but also you need, a lot of papers. You need to be good at writing grants. You need to be really good at networking and be really lucky at the same time. So just doing your PhD is not enough. You really need to actually venture out, talk to people from other labs, other institutes, make these connections. This is definitely what is needed to secure grants and to write successful grants with other people. You need to have these connections. And then if you want to go into industry afterwards, basically, I ended up eventually in industry. Well, it is useful to have a PhD, but for a lot of jobs, you will. So let's say if you wanted to become a scientist, like a bench scientist in a pharma company after your PhD, then, in a sense, you are overqualified and underexperienced at the same time. And I think it's really important to say this, that it's both. They don't want to pay you extra because you are underexperienced, but at the same time, it's weird because you're overqualified. So this might stop you from getting some of the jobs you could get if you were just a master student, because then you would be both underqualified and underexperienced, which means they wouldn't have to pay you extra money for that extra qualification you have when you have a PhD, if that makes sense. So you could just do your masters and climb on the ladder and get a job that you would get maybe slightly easier with a PhD, but because you get that industry experience, you will get this job. So this is exactly the case within medical writing. If you don't have industry experience, your PhD will be very helpful. If you only have masters, then you probably most likely should get a job within industry. For example, within quality control, quality assurance, maybe as a scientist, whatever it is, and then spend, a year or 2 years with that, and then move to medical writing. So, in that sense, you will make more money than PhD students, and you will become that medical writer faster than a PhD student because, for most of us, PhDs take at least 3 to 4 years. So that's another really important factor to think about. PhD is years and years of really hard work, of blood, tears, sweat, everything. And in the end of the day, is it worth doing it? And is it enough? Well, I don't think it's enough if you want to go into industry because you really need to make connections and, show that you can deal with clients and just have some extra experience, essentially. And at the same time, if you want to stay in academia, then that networking is so important to secure grants. So I don't think, unfortunately, PhD is enough. And it's really a horrible thing to say and to admit because I remember my own PhD, you know, how many weeks I spent working 50, 60 hours a week after week. Um, Countless. How many days I spent working 10 hours? Countless. Um, and then on top of that, the idea that you actually need to do more to be successful afterwards. Like we don't have bandwidth, mental bandwidth, physical bandwidth to just have energy and mental capacity to do more. It's really, really difficult. So I think anyone who wants to do a PhD ideally really should have a very good plan why they want to do it and how it's going to help in their overall career progression. Because otherwise, it's just, so much hard work potentially for very little benefit in terms of your career progression. But at the same time, if I haven't done my PhD, I wouldn't travel as much as I did. I wouldn't have all of these interesting conversations about science. So, it is definitely the beautiful side of doing research that you have to go to conferences, you have to travel around. You have 1 year, 2 year contract jobs, and you keep moving around again and again, meeting new people, learning new things. And I think the biggest beauty of doing a PhD is that you get to ask questions about something you're passionate, and you get to answer these questions. So you can be a little bit like a child where, like children just walk around and ask questions. Why is the sky blue? Why is this and this that? And so on. And you can ask very similar questions when you're doing a PhD, these very basic questions. So this is definitely the beauty of it. And in that sense, it was totally worth doing my PhD because I was incredibly passionate about my topic. And at the same time, I didn't know what else I could do. So it was a good way to escape the real world. I had good grades. I liked doing research, so I could do it. But you know, if you think that at this time of your life, spending at least 3 to 4 years doing research, 50 to 60 hours a week, week after week, is a good investment in your time, then sure, it's absolutely worth doing a PhD. Um, but I think we just need to be real about it, and we just need to realize that PhD is not enough. You need to do more. So how are you going to do more? How can you even find time to do more? It's so difficult. When I was a PhD student, I did run a society, I worked for a charity, I did some teaching, so I did some extra stuff as well, which actually, in the end of the day, ended up being incredibly beneficial on my CV because, as much as I had to be academic and I had to know the techniques and all of this, I really also had to know other stuff like, my soft skills, be able to demonstrate my soft skills that I'm good with people. So, unfortunately, whatever you want to do afterwards, whether you want to stay in academia or you want to go outside of academia, PhD is not enough. You will still need more training, you will still need more stuff. And this is why all of the, PIs call postdocing just another training. And when I was a postdoc, it just felt like I was doing another PhD. So it is a continuous training, whatever you decide to do. But it is very, very hard to find that extra time and mental capacity and energy to do all of this extra stuff. But I think, I'm sounding quite negative about it. So on a positive note, I think, when you are 22, 23 and you start doing a PhD and you really don't know what to do with your life, this is a definitely great experience that will teach you how to persevere, how to become resilient, how to think about problems, how to troubleshoot, how to find solutions, and how to be realistic about what can be done, what cannot be done straight away, and that idea of 80/20, that um, these are experiments, these are things I should focus on because they will give me the most of the results, right? So if I focus on the 20% of this whole set of experiments, these 20% will actually give me the majority of my thesis, majority of my data. This is what I should prioritize. And PhD definitely teaches you that. And, all in all, I've learned how to think, how to question things, and how to troubleshoot when I was a PhD student. So it really made me who I am. And this is something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. And I'm not sure whether I will be able to learn, how to think if I didn't decide to do a PhD, if I did something else, if I went straight into industry. I would imagine that I would essentially end up being a different person with a slightly different approach to things. So I'm grateful for doing a PhD. Would I do it again? That's a hard question. And I think it's difficult to answer, but definitely at the time I did it because of all of the wrong reasons, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So right now I would sit down and think really hard what I want to do afterwards and then decide to study this for my PhD. This would probably work a little bit better for me because then I would use my knowledge from my PhD and apply it way more into the real life workforce than what happens to me after my PhD. So I'll leave this with you. I think you need to answer yourself whether it is worth for you doing a PhD. But all in all, what I can say is that I don't think PhD is enough. And if you do decide to do a PhD, if you're doing it right now, then unfortunately, gosh, there will be more training and more pain coming because PhD doesn't even fully train you to become a PI. And obviously, there are very, very few people, very, very few instances that you can finish a PhD and immediately become a fully independent principal investigator. So, all in all, it's a beautiful journey, but it's a hard one. And this is where I'm going to leave you. So, if you benefit from this content, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.